In the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania lies a prison so vast, so meticulously controlled, and so quietly feared that inmates call it the Silent Giant. Today we take you inside Allenwood's massive high-security complex, where some of America's most dangerous federal inmates live under watchful eyes and unspoken rules. Before we enter, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the stories that unfold behind these walls are real, raw, and unlike anything you've heard before. The Allenwood Federal Correctional Complex didn't appear on the map overnight, but it might as well have. Constructed in layers across several decades, the complex eventually grew into one of the largest federal incarceration hubs on the East Coast. Positioned quietly in Union County, Pennsylvania, it blends into surrounding farmland, an intentional design that allows the institution to function without constant attention from the outside world. Yet anyone who has ever set foot near the facility knows that the silence surrounding Allenwood is part of its intimidating charm. The complex consists of multiple facilities: a low-security camp, a medium-security institution, and the centerpiece, USP Allenwood, a high-security penitentiary designed to contain some of the most violent offenders under federal custody. While it lacks the media notoriety of places like ADX Florence, Allenwood's reputation inside criminal circles is unmistakable. Inmates call it the Silent Giant not just for its size but for its atmosphere. Rigid schedules, relentless surveillance, and long stretches of time where almost no human sound escapes the cell blocks. It is a place where noise is controlled as tightly as movement. USP Allenwood officially opened in 1993, built during a period of rising federal incarceration rates tied to sweeping drug laws and enhanced sentencing guidelines. But what truly sets it apart is the precision of its design. Every building follows a strict geometric layout, a philosophy borrowed from fortress architecture. From above, the facility resembles a series of concentric layers, each with its own perimeter fencing, razor wire coils, and electronic detection systems. Every movement in and out of those layers is recorded. Every moment is time-stamped. Former correctional officers often remark that the penitentiary's infrastructure feels less like a traditional prison and more like a long-term behavioral experiment. Corridors are intentionally narrow. Cell blocks are engineered to amplify guard footsteps. Even the recreation yards have limited, blind pockets, forcing inmates into predictable patterns of motion. Nothing is accidental. During the 1990s and early 2000s, Allenwood took in a wave of high-risk inmates from dismantled gang operations, large-scale drug networks, and interstate criminal organizations. Many had histories of escape attempts or prison assaults. In response, Allenwood implemented one of the earliest widespread uses of controlled movement, a system that limits inmate transitions between areas to short, strictly timed intervals under heavy escort. For some prisoners, this was the most suffocating aspect of daily life. For administrators, it was the perfect mechanism to maintain order. Over time, Allenwood's reputation evolved into something paradoxical. On one side, inmates quietly acknowledged it wasn't the most violent penitentiary in the system. Catastrophic disturbances were rare, largely because the rules were enforced with unwavering consistency. On the other side, those same inmates would warn newcomers, "This place will take your voice, your time, your mind, if you let it." The isolation wasn't always physical. Sometimes it was the crushing monotony, the sense of being buried in a machine that never slowed down or slipped up. By the mid-2000s, Allenwood housed men tied to some of the country's most notorious criminal cases: mob enforcers, cartel partners, violent offenders serving life terms, and federal inmates transferred from overcrowded or unstable facilities. Each arrived with their own story but most quickly learned the same lesson. Allenwood didn't care who you were on the outside. Once processed through intake and escorted into the stark interior, identity dissolved into a number, and the environment took control. In this chapter, the goal isn't to sensationalize but to understand the scope of Allenwood's existence. It is more than a prison. It is federal design philosophy made concrete, massive, quiet, unstoppable. A place built to contain danger without broadcasting it. A place where the United States hides some of its most challenging inmates in plain sight, knowing that the world outside rarely stops to consider what goes on beyond the fences. That silence, that absence of public curiosity, is precisely why the Silent Giant earned its name. And it's why the stories carved into its walls are both haunting and deeply human. Walking into USP Allenwood is an experience carefully engineered to break momentum. Before visitors or new inmates ever reach the housing units, they move through a sequence of barriers, each designed to reinforce a single message: control begins at the threshold. The entry building, stark and angular, stands without ornamentation. Once inside, heavy security doors operate on a time delay, slamming shut with a hydraulic hiss that echoes down the corridor. Every sound in this space is intentional, reminding newcomers that they have stepped into a world governed by precision. The interior layout mirrors federal guidelines for high-security institutions but carries the unique imprint of Allenwood's designers. Hallways form long, unbroken lines, making it impossible for inmates to disappear around corners. Surveillance cameras, hundreds of them, monitor every intersection. Even the ceiling tiles are reinforced to prevent tampering. Former staff have said Allenwood isn't merely watched, it's observed with military-level discipline. At the heart of the prison lies the Special Housing Unit, or SHU, a place where inmates are sent for disciplinary segregation or protective custody. Inside, the architecture shifts from strict order to suffocating minimalism. Cells are sealed with solid doors instead of bars, preventing communication between occupants. Lighting remains constant, eliminating the natural rise and fall of the day. Inmates describe the SHU as a time vacuum, a place where hours dissolve into one another. While the Bureau of Prisons maintains standards for humane conditions, the psychological toll of segregation is undeniable, something inmates frequently mention in letters, legal filings, and interviews. Outside the SHU, the general housing units follow a different philosophy. Maximize structure to minimize unpredictability. Two-tiered pods surround a central officer station enclosed in bullet-resistant glass. From that vantage point, staff can observe dozens of cells simultaneously. The design reduces blind spots, allowing officers to detect tension before it escalates. Yet for inmates, the lack of privacy, every movement visible, every conversation potentially overheard, creates a pressure cooker of suppressed emotion. Recreation areas are equally regimented. Instead of open fields, the yards are divided into fenced sections to separate inmates by unit. Weight benches, concrete tables, and narrow walking tracks form the extent of physical outlets. Despite the controlled environment, the yards often become the social engine of the prison. Gangs, though unofficial, organize here. Alliances form, disputes simmer. For many inmates, the yard represents the closest thing to freedom and therefore the closest thing to danger. One of Allenwood's most distinctive features is its commitment to strict movement schedules. Unlike some penitentiaries where inmates freely navigate between work assignments, chow hall, and recreation, Allenwood keeps transitions short and heavily supervised. When the loudspeaker announces a movement, inmates exit their cells, walk in single file, and follow predetermined routes. Miss your window and you remain where you are until the next one. This system dramatically reduces spontaneous interactions, which in turn reduces the likelihood of assaults. But it also drains spontaneity from daily life, reinforcing a sense of living inside a blueprint more than a community. Even the dining hall reflects this architecture of control. Long tables are bolted to the floor, seating is limited, and officers maintain a vantage point from elevated platforms. Meals are quick, often under 20 minutes, because time spent congregating increases opportunities for conflict. Inmates learn to eat with speed and efficiency. Talking is allowed but monitored. Every meal feels like a silent negotiation of space and tension. Educational and vocational programs exist, as required by federal policy, but participation varies. Some inmates use these programs to cope with long sentences. Others avoid them to maintain criminal alliances or reputations. What is consistently mentioned, however, is the structure of the classrooms. Small, windowless spaces resembling office cubicles more than learning environments. Even rehabilitation is measured and controlled. To an outsider, these architectural details may seem sterile, even forgettable. But to the men who live inside Allenwood, they form the skeleton of their existence. The prison isn't merely a collection of walls and fences, it is a psychological ecosystem built around containment. Every design choice, from the placement of cameras to the timing of doors, serves the same purpose: eliminate unpredictability and assert order over a population defined by rule-breaking. And yet, within this rigid framework, life finds ways to unfold. Stories emerge, of conflict, of survival, of unexpected alliances. The architecture may define the boundaries, but the human element shapes everything inside them. What happens next, in the daily rhythm of Allenwood's high-security world, reveals a deeper truth about the institution and the men it holds. Inside Allenwood, identity becomes both a shield and a target. Every inmate arrives with a record, a history, and a reputation that precedes him through the concrete corridors. Some arrive infamous, names tied to headlines, federal indictments, or large-scale criminal enterprises. Others arrive unknown, swallowed by the sheer magnitude of a system that houses thousands. Yet once they cross the threshold of USP Allenwood, their lives fold into the institution's hierarchy, an intricate structure based not on official ranking but on perceived strength, loyalty, and purpose. Among those who helped shape Allenwood's internal culture were inmates tied to major East Coast crime families. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the prison became a temporary home to soldiers and associates from the Colombo, Bonanno, and Philadelphia crime families. Though the federal government successfully dismantled many of these organizations, the men inside carried with them decades of underworld etiquette, respect, silence, and an understanding that reputation could be more powerful than any weapon. These individuals rarely caused disturbances. They didn't need to. Their presence alone dictated the behavior of those around them. Then there were the gang members, leaders and foot soldiers from groups like the Bloods, Latin Kings, and various regional crews. Their influence inside Allenwood fluctuated, but their presence remained consistent. Unlike the old-school mobsters who carried legacy power, gang members relied on numbers and alliance. Their politics were younger, more volatile, and deeply territorial. For many of them, Allenwood wasn't a destination but a checkpoint in a longer federal journey, where connections formed behind bars would later shape activity on the streets. The most unpredictable inmates, however, were not always the ones affiliated with organized crime. They were the individuals serving extreme sentences, life terms or stacked decades with little hope of release. These men carried an aura of quiet resignation mixed with simmering desperation. Some adapted to the relentless routine, finding purpose in exercise, legal work, or religion. Others battled internal storms heightened by confinement. Staff members described them as the still waters you watch closely, men who seldom raised their voices but whose eyes revealed the psychological weight of endless years. One particularly defining chapter in Allenwood's human landscape came from the arrival of inmates transferred after significant incidents at other penitentiaries. These included individuals marked as instigators or threats in previous institutions. The Bureau of Prisons occasionally used Allenwood's rigid structure as a stabilizing environment for them, believing that the controlled movement and strict surveillance could reduce their influence. And in many cases it did. However, that same environment also had the unintended effect of forcing high-profile inmates into close proximity, creating an undercurrent of tension that simmered just beneath the surface. Within this mix lived the men who became institutional legends, not because of violence but because of their adaptability. One such inmate, known among others as the Professor, was a former financial executive serving a lengthy sentence for large-scale fraud. While he arrived without the physical presence or gang connections typical of a maximum security inmate, he became a quiet powerhouse within the education programs. His ability to help others navigate legal paperwork, write appeals, and earn GEDs made him a respected figure, an example of how influence inside Allenwood didn't always come from force. Another figure frequently mentioned in inmate accounts was Hawk, a former enforcer from a Midwestern drug operation. Hawk's intimidating stature made him a natural authority, but it was his strict personal code that earned trust. He settled disputes before they escalated, enforced boundaries within his unit, and acted as an informal mediator. Staff members often acknowledged his stabilizing role, though they could never officially endorse it. These personalities, sharp, hardened, intelligent, broken, and everything in between, formed the living architecture of Allenwood. The prison structure dictated their movement, but their interactions filled the space with unspoken rules. Respect became currency. Silence became survival. And through the small windows of their cells, each man carried stories that stretched far beyond the walls of the penitentiary. Yet even within this mosaic of identities, an invisible boundary existed, the line between surviving and disappearing. Some men learned to navigate it. Others became swallowed by the deep currents of confinement. What mattered most in Allenwood wasn't who you were when you entered, but who you became when stripped of everything familiar. For new arrivals at USP Allenwood, the first days are the most decisive. Surviving in a high-security federal prison requires more than physical strength. It demands an understanding of unwritten rules, guidelines not posted on walls, but passed through generations of inmates. The men who fail to recognize these rules quickly find themselves isolated, targeted, or worse. Those who learn them early can navigate the institution with far fewer scars. The first rule is simple: mind your business. In Allenwood, curiosity is interpreted as intrusion. When two inmates speak in low tones on the tier, you don't look at them. When an argument erupts across the yard, you walk the other way. When a cell door is cracked open for a private conversation, you pretend it's invisible. This rule applies equally to violence. If something happens nearby, an altercation, a stabbing, a sudden code shouted across the unit, you don't react unless directly involved. Reaction invites attention. Attention invites questions. And questions are dangerous currency. The second rule, respect space. Inside Allenwood, personal space is one of the few things inmates can control. Even within a crowded unit, each man has an invisible boundary. Violating it, even unintentionally, can spark conflict. Something as simple as stepping too close in line or sitting uninvited at a table can escalate into a confrontation. These boundaries shift between groups, gang-affiliated tables, neutral zones, areas controlled by older inmates, but the expectation persists. Know where you belong and don't test the borders unless you're prepared for consequences. Third, debts are binding. In prison, a single favor can define months, sometimes years. Borrowing commissary items, taking food from another inmate, or receiving help with legal matters creates an obligation. The expectation of repayment isn't negotiable, and interest is rarely measured in dollars. Many conflicts that erupt inside Allenwood trace back to small debts allowed to linger too long. The safest strategy is to avoid borrowing altogether, but for men with nothing, that rule becomes nearly impossible to follow. Fourth, choose your associations wisely. In Allenwood, who you talk to, sit with, and walk with can determine your safety. Racial and gang lines, though unofficial in federal institutions, influence daily life. Some inmates choose to remain unaffiliated, navigating the prison through neutrality and careful diplomacy. Others align with groups for protection. Yet the most important aspect isn't the choice itself, it's the commitment. Wavering between groups, switching allegiances, or appearing inconsistent invites distrust from all sides. Fifth, never show weakness. This rule isn't about bravado, it's about survival. Emotional vulnerability, fear, anxiety, loneliness, can be used as leverage. The environment encourages men to adopt stoic facades. Even the act of requesting protective custody can brand an inmate permanently. As a result, many choose silence over seeking help, carrying invisible burdens that chip away at their psyche. The mental strain becomes part of the daily grind, an unspoken challenge that each inmate must confront alone. But among all the rules, perhaps the most important is the sixth. Time is your most valuable weapon or your worst enemy. Unlike lower security facilities where routines allow for distraction, Allenwood compresses and controls every moment. Inmates quickly realize they must structure their days with intention. Exercise, reading, legal work, writing letters. Men who fail to build routines fall into the prison's psychological traps. Lethargy, anger, paranoia. Officers have noted that the strongest inmates, mentally speaking, are not always the most physically intimidating, they're the ones who master time before it consumes them. For many men, learning these rules comes not through mentors but through observation. Watching how seasoned inmates move through the unit, slowly, deliberately, eyes scanning without appearing curious, teaches novices the rhythm of survival. The unspoken communication is constant. A nod means acknowledgement. A silence means warning. A look held too long means trouble. Contrary to public belief, Allenwood does not operate on constant violence. In fact, its strict structure suppresses open conflict more effectively than at many other high-security facilities. But beneath that calm surface, tension is ever present. Every rule exists because, at some point in the prison's history, breaking it resulted in bloodshed. The Code of Survival is not an official handbook, yet every inmate knows it. It is a social contract enforced not by officers but by the men themselves. Some embrace it, some resent it, but no one escapes it. What emerges from this unwritten system is a complex ecosystem, one built on fear, discipline, and adaptability. And understanding it is essential to understanding how men survive inside the silent giant. Inside USP Allenwood, daily life unfolds with the precision of a machine that has been running for decades without interruption. To outsiders, the schedule may appear simple: wake, eat, work, sleep. But for inmates who live it, each day is a carefully navigated maze of controlled movement, silent negotiation, and internal strategy. Time is everything here: a guardian, a tormentor, a blueprint for survival. The day begins before dawn, long before the rural Pennsylvania sky begins to brighten. At 5 a.m., overhead lights flicker on in every housing unit, coating the cells with an artificial glow that signals the transition from rest to routine. There is no snooze button, no gradual start to the morning. Officers walk the tier, checking each cell, ensuring bodies are upright and accounted for. The scraping of metal bunks, the rustle of blankets, and the low grunt of waking men blend into the early soundscape of the prison. For some inmates, mornings are sacred, a time to exercise, pray, read, or simply sit in silence before the chaos of the day begins. Others use these quiet hours to prepare for jobs in maintenance, food service, landscaping, or the UNICOR factory, where federal inmates manufacture goods ranging from furniture to industrial products. These assignments offer structure and, in some cases, a modest source of income. But more importantly, they provide purpose. By 6 a.m., officers call the first controlled movement of the day, signaling the shift from wake-up to chow hall. Movement occurs in staggered waves, each unit allowed through the gates for only a few minutes at a time. For inmates, missing a movement window means missing the meal entirely. Inside the chow hall, the atmosphere is orderly yet tense. Long tables bolted to the floor accommodate hundreds of men who eat quickly, aware that lingering too long draws unwanted attention. Conversations are brief and coded, filled with subtle gestures instead of open discussions. After breakfast, work crews disperse. Those assigned to the UNICOR manufacturing plant spend long hours assembling products under the supervision of civilian staff and correctional officers. The work is repetitive but offers one of the few lawful avenues for inmates to earn money, sometimes enough to support commissary purchases or send modest amounts to family. For many, the job is a lifeline, a tether to a world where productivity still matters. Inmates without work detail occupy their time in other ways: weightlifting in the yard, running the narrow tracks, studying for educational programs, or engaging in legal research in the small library. Despite the restrictions, Allenwood maintains consistent educational opportunities: GED classes, vocational training, and correspondence courses. Some inmates cling to these programs as their only hope for a future beyond prison walls. Others see them as a temporary escape from monotony. By midday, the controlled movement schedule resumes. Lunch follows a similar pattern to breakfast: quick, structured, and silent. Meals vary but rarely surprise: processed meats, rice, beans, and occasionally fresh fruit. Commissary items supplement the bland diet, and for some inmates, the weekly commissary day becomes the highlight of their entire week. Food is more than nourishment here, it is comfort, currency, and, at times, a cause of conflict. The afternoon brings more work sessions, yard time, or indoor recreation depending on the weather. Allenwood's yard, though restrictive, becomes a social hub. On clear days, inmates gather in small groups according to unspoken affiliations. Some work out intensely, sculpting their bodies not only for strength but also for psychological defense. Others walk laps in pairs, discussing family issues, legal frustrations, or prison politics. A few sit alone, heads bowed, trying to shut out the noise of the world around them. By 3:30 p.m., work crews begin returning to their units. The final count of the day is meticulous. Officers ensure that every inmate is accounted for and logged in the system. Any discrepancy triggers an institution-wide lockdown, a scenario dreaded by both inmates and officers. Even when counts go smoothly, the tension during these moments is palpable. Time seems to slow, silence deepens, and every man waits for the officer's voice confirming the count is clear. Dinner occurs in the early evening, and afterward, inmates retreat to their units for showers, card games, writing letters, or watching limited TV programs through the common area televisions. But even recreation is bound by rules. Volume levels, seating arrangements, and channel selections follow the unwritten code established by the inmate population. By 10 p.m., the lights dim, signaling the end of another day lived under relentless structure. But sleep does not come easily for everyone. Some men lie awake replaying mistakes that led them here. Others wrestle with the psychological weight of long sentences. The hum of ventilation systems, distant shouts, and occasional clanging doors form the nightly soundtrack of Allenwood. For the outside world, a day in Allenwood is unimaginable. Yet for the men inside, this rhythm becomes their reality, unchanging, unyielding. A life defined not by freedom but by routine. Not by choice but by necessity. Because inside the silent giant, time is not simply passed. It is endured. Allenwood's identity is shaped not only by the men it confines but also by the individuals responsible for maintaining order within its walls. Correctional officers, counselors, case managers, psychologists, and administrative staff form the backbone of daily operations. Their actions influence the atmosphere of the institution, the morale of the inmates, and the overall security of the complex. Yet their experience is often overshadowed by the narratives of the incarcerated. Within these walls, staff members are both guardians and targets, enforcers and negotiators, human beings navigating one of the most challenging professional environments imaginable. Correctional officers, COs, enter the compound through the same perimeter gates as inmates, though under very different circumstances. Each morning they pass through metal detectors, swipe identification cards, and receive briefings about any incidents, threats, or unusual activity. They walk the hallways with practiced confidence, their eyes trained to detect subtle changes in behavior, an argument brewing, an inmate unusually quiet, a tension in the air that might signal trouble. A CO's intuition, honed over years, becomes their greatest asset. Staff members quickly learn that the prison environment is governed by routine but fueled by unpredictability. Even on calm days, minor conflicts can erupt without warning. A commissary mix-up, a misunderstanding in the yard, or an unexpected transfer order can trigger a chain reaction. Officers must react swiftly while maintaining professionalism. They are trained to de-escalate, to anticipate, and to remain composed in situations that would overwhelm the average person. Despite popular portrayals of prisons as battlegrounds between staff and inmates, the relationship inside Allenwood is often more nuanced. Mutual respect, though fragile, plays a critical role. Officers who treat inmates with fairness typically experience fewer conflicts. Those who show favoritism, disrespect, or inconsistency risk escalating tensions. Experienced COs understand that authority alone does not maintain order, credibility does. Yet even with mutual respect, danger is always present. Certain inmates carry violent histories involving staff assaults at other facilities, and Allenwood's record includes incidents where officers were attacked during pat searches, movement escorts, or cell extractions. These events reinforce the ever-present awareness that safety is a shifting concept, never guaranteed, always contingent on vigilance. Beyond the officers, other staff members influence the prison's daily rhythm. Counselors and case managers meet with inmates to discuss sentence calculations, program participation, and release planning. These sessions can be emotionally charged, especially for inmates serving decades or life sentences. A change to projected release dates or a denied program request can trigger frustration, anger, or hopelessness. Psychologists and mental health workers face their own challenges. High-security prisons house individuals with complex psychological landscapes, trauma, depression, anxiety, and the long-term effects of confinement. Yet mental health resources are stretched thin, and many inmates are reluctant to seek help, fearing stigma or retaliation. For those who do, therapy offers a rare chance to speak freely, a brief escape from the constant pressure of prison life. But the success of these interventions varies, often limited by the constraints of the institution. Education and vocational staff also hold an important role. They witness inmates during rare moments of engagement, learning new skills, studying for exams, or writing assignments. These staff members often see glimpses of humanity that the security structure obscures. But they, too, operate under strict guidelines, aware that even a classroom must be monitored and controlled. Above them all sits the administrative tier, the warden, associate wardens, department heads, and regional overseers from the Bureau of Prisons. Their decisions shape everything, from lockdown procedures to staffing levels to inmate transfers. Allenwood is known for its efficient adherence to policy, but behind the scenes, administrators juggle budget constraints, political pressure, staffing shortages, and the delicate balance between security and rehabilitation. For staff, the emotional toll of working at Allenwood is significant. Many officers describe a shift in how they view the world after years inside. Hyper-awareness becomes second nature. Trust becomes selective. Some develop compassion fatigue, others become hardened. Burnout is common, turnover steady. Yet despite these challenges, many remain dedicated, driven by a sense of duty, stability, or in some cases a belief that their work makes a difference. What unites staff and inmates, paradoxically, is the atmosphere of the silent giant itself. A place where every action is scrutinized, every movement controlled, and every day shaped by the tension between order and chaos. Both sides learn to adapt, to maneuver within the rigid structure, and to confront the psychological weight of confinement from different angles. Because at Allenwood, the watchers and the watched are bound by the same environment, each shaping the other in ways that blur the lines between authority and endurance. As our journey through Allenwood's vast and unforgiving high-security complex comes to a close, one truth remains impossible to ignore. This place was built not just to contain men, but to confront them. Within its concrete walls and razor-lined perimeters, identities shift, routines calcify, and time becomes a force as powerful as any lock or chain. We've seen how the architecture shapes behavior, how unspoken codes govern survival, how staff and inmates navigate a delicate balance between order and chaos. We have stepped into corridors few outsiders ever witness, explored the psychology of long-term confinement, and listened to the echoes of stories muted by decades of silence. Allenwood is more than a prison. It is a mirror, reflecting the systems, choices, and histories that led thousands of men here. A reminder that behind every statistic lies a life shaped by past decisions and future uncertainties. A testament to the human capacity for endurance in environments designed to test every limit. Yet, as the gates close behind us and the compound fades into the Pennsylvania landscape, one lingering thought remains. The silent giant never sleeps. Every day its routines continue. Every night, its lights burn through the darkness. Officers take their posts. Inmates return to their cells. Time grinds forward with mechanical precision. And somewhere inside, a man stares at the ceiling, wondering whether he will ever escape the weight of the years ahead, whether redemption, forgiveness, or transformation can exist in a place built to suppress all three. If this documentary has shown anything, it is that stories are still alive inside those walls. Stories of resilience, regret, power, fear, adaptation, and survival. Stories that remind us how thin the line can be between the world inside and the world beyond the razor wire. Before you go, take a moment to hit subscribe, like, and share this video. Not for numbers, not for the algorithm, but to help amplify the voices and realities hidden deep within America's most fortified institutions. Every click tells the system that the world is paying attention. And as always, thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware. And remember, behind every wall, there's another story waiting to be told.